Welcome to the Totally Unreal Book Club Podcast, or TUBC for short. This podcast is in association with and comprised of the Voices of Anarchy Improv comedy group, and we are here to discuss our favorite totally unreal books, movies, video games, etc. on a weekly basis.
This book club is totally unreal.
I'm your host, Will Wood, and at the table today we have, starting to my left, Dahi English.
I have been driven insane. That's the name of my car.
Steve Marriott.
Bubble wrap is the most enjoyable kind of wrap.
And today we don't have any of our regular female panel members, so it's just the three of us. And because we're a little short, I'll also introduce and quip myself. And Will Wood. Hello. If you went to Mars, you would be a Martian.
Well put, sir. Well put.
And before we begin today, please tell me, the three of us, what have we consumed today? Media
the
or
souls
otherwise.
of my enemies, mostly.
Media-wise, because I just ate like a huge pack of gyozas, which was pretty tasty.
I've been eating all of my old DVDs.
True story. I had my headphones in. They have a little built-in microphone, and I answered a phone call.
You didn't reverse fart them, did you?
I did not, no. But I was holding a banana at the time, and I got a phone call, so I pretended my banana was my phone and just talked through the Bluetooth. And I laughed to myself a lot.
If Rafi were here, he would say, "You stole that from me."
Yeah,
that was a pretty good David D. Magic impression, wasn't it?
It was very good.
Yeah, it's uncanny.
Speaking of valleys, Steve, you picked the book this week.
I did.
Does it have a valley in it? I don't remember.
I don't remember the full geography of the island per se, but there very well could be a valley. Well, you guys read it. Do you remember any valleys? Well, we'll get to that in a minute.
There were 4 valleys.
4 valleys.
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. Well, of course, the book this week is called The Island of Less Than Superfolk by Jenny Copperton. And this is an island of people that have superhero names with no superhero powers.
Yes.
And it's just where they go to get away from all the people that are, like the paparazzi and stuff, that are trying to get pictures of them, but they're not celebrities. They have no abilities. Yeah, well, you guys read it, so.
Well, yeah, we sure did. We sure did read it.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone who has read it, I would like to say that it is a book that I have read.
Oh, definitely.
I 100% agree with that.
Yes. Now, what I found really interesting, this is kind of spoilers.
Hold on to it then.
Yeah, I'll
you
hold
take
on
that
to
little
that.
thought and you put it in your front pocket, and we'll come back to it later.
Absolutely.
I like how this book it's really interesting the way they did it. It actually has this unique sort of rewritable feature, whereas this book is the most contemporary book because every time you read it, it will be the current year.
Mm-hmm.
So if you read it now, it's 2018. If you read this next year, when I read it originally in 2005, the same exact copy that I have, set it in 2005. But now it's set in 2018. And if you read it 2 years from now, it'll be set in 2020.
And you would think that it's just the year that updates, but it's not. It's the cultural references as well. It's really interesting.
Very interesting indeed. And
Yeah,
every
it is
chapter-
really interesting because I was about to remember that it didn't change any of that so that we wouldn't have to talk about that. But unfortunately, you remembered it first, and now we do.
Very true. Yeah.
Yep.
So, good thing
Well,
we're-
I mean, that's only the ebook version. In the actual printed version, you have to write it in yourself.
and they have released a new
true.
edition every year, but I mean, it's up to you which version you want to read. Like, I only read the 2015 version, which is missing a few chapters off the end.
So you're commonly confused, which is what I explained earlier. It's not. There's only one edition of the book. It changes itself.
Oh, it changes itself.
Well, as we explained in the written version, you're
supposed to.
You change it.
Well, I was a little lazy. I just kind of read it. Like,
See, for me, I thought it auto-updated because I don't recall changing it, but...
You've got that memory problem, right?
Yes, right, where I clearly have changed it every year and then forgot about it. And Dahi read the ebook, and the ebook is the version that updates the cultural references, but not the written copy that I have, so we both remembered it correctly.
Yes.
But I'm sure we'll talk about both of them anyway.
Oh, we will. We'll get into it.
I should certainly hope so after you guys spent all the time to read it.
All of the time.
All of the time.
Speaking of time, this book does not contain time travel.
That is is very refreshing. I actually chose this book for that very reason.
But it does contain time.
Most books do.
Well, what happens...
not all books, Steve.
That's very
There
true.
is one chapter in this book that does not contain time.
No. We'll get to that later. That's
yes.
very spoiler-esque. I'm
So-
going to call on you to bring that back up again later, actually.
So basically what happens at the outset, like this is the high concept, like you said.
Are you jumping into
they're-
the plot outline?
Well, no, just the general idea. It's not just that they're on the island, right? They were dropped into the island at the start.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, they were dropped in on an airplane,
Yes.
and they each parachuted out to different sections of the island.
Yeah.
But they voluntarily decided to go to this island. They signed up for it in their respective hometowns.
Yes, in fact, before they got on the plane to get to the island, they spent about 60 seconds just running around, sort of punching each other for fun, and then they got on the plane and then went to the island.
They wanted to establish to each other that none of them had superpowers, and if any of them fought back with superpowers, they weren't allowed on the plane.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. It was a veritable battleground.
There was the human flying squirrel was on the plane with them, and as soon as he jumped out, he flew away, and they're like, well, he better not land on the island. He is definitely not allowed.
Yes, the human flying squirrel, of course, was just an unusually short man.
With
With a
webbed
wingsuit.
arms
No,
and
he
legs.
was just wearing a wing.
Just
wingsuit.
wearing wings?
Yes,
A
they
wingsuit.
don't
Well,
have
Then
any
he probably could
powers.
have come to the island.
Yeah.
No, but he wasn't supposed to be on the plane, is what I'm saying.
Oh, he is on the island, but that's spoilers.
Sorry.
We're not in the
Should we
spoiler
just jump
part
into
yet.
spoilers?
I think at this point we already kind of have. but
Okay,
let's
if
put
you
the warning
haven't,
up.
if you haven't listened, if you haven't read this book, or if you did and then forgot reading it after you changed the date, skip now to the end of the podcast. We'll catch you next week. Spoiler warning going up.
Warning. Incoming spoiler. Warning. Incoming spoiler.
Okay, now we're in spoilers, and it's time to spoil the shit out of this one.
Oh my god, dudes. I can't believe it wasn't an island. It was just a peninsula.
I know. That's why I did talk about that earlier briefly. I mentioned it.
Which explains why more and more people just showed up on this island.
Especially when the tour bus showed up with all the people with their
Not only
cameras.
the tour bus, but like you mentioned, the tour bush was very, it was very, because it was how they were getting people onto the peninsula through camouflage, because it was just an abnormally large shrubbery that opened up. It was kind of like a TARDIS. It was bigger on the inside, except that it wasn't. It was the exact dimensions on the inside, but the bush was
Similar
so
concept.
large and was such a bush that you couldn't tell. Some people even mistook it for a tree, but it wasn't.
No, they had to pay extra for the tree camouflage.
Yes. But let us start where all things do, in the middle of the beginning. So,
Well, yeah, we've already established the beginning of the beginning was the plane where they all parachuted out.
well, actually, before that, there was the 60 seconds they spent running around punching each other.
That's true.
Actually, I did read it originally back in 2005, and the tour bush, everyone just saluted it and said, "Mr. President." Like I was. It's
Yes.
confusing.
There were
obviously
many
did not read that
different
version.
Well, there were many different forms of camouflage to this bush, and we will get to that. But what I would like to state is that, as you said, as we both said, the book originally came out in 2005, and then it updated itself in the ebook version or manually.
But that was
You
the
may
most
have forgotten
frustrating
about
thing,
that.
Is you had to pay to see the new version so that you could update it yourself. It was almost cheaper to just buy the new version, but that wasn't an option unless you bought the ebook.
You just kept buying it? Because my copy came with like a bunch of stickers that had little numbers that I could just stick over top of.
Yeah, but
of course I don't remember doing that. But
it wasn't just the year that changed. You said so yourself. So
in the written version, yes, it was just the the ebook version.
That makes
the
more
digital
sense.
version.
Added extra chapters and like backstories to the human flying squirrel and the other entertaining characters.
Well, if it didn't before, it definitely did now.
Absolutely.
That's what happens when you have an auto-updating book.
Good on you, Jenny Copperton. You were way ahead of your time in 2005
Yes.
and every subsequent year.
Too ahead of your time. Speaking of time, it's time to start with the plot outline. That rhymed.
That was a horrible segue.
Well, you're a horrible person. I'm just kidding. I like you as
It's too late.
much
You said
as...
it. Words can't be taken back.
Okay, well, never mind then.
Speaking of horrible people, our protagonist, who starts off punching people, he's actually the first to punch.
Well, his name
beginning.
is Punchy Punch Man.
Yeah, that's his
It's pronounced
superhero
Punchman,
name.
though. Like he
Yes.
was not the Punch Man.
Wait,
No,
hang on.
yeah, it's his last name, but people saw it as Punch Man.
Was that
why
his
he
superhero
decided-
name or not? Was that his real name?
Yes, it was
not a
both.
superhero. He was just a guy.
His name, Punchiford, but went by Punchy for short. Last name, Punchman.
Okay.
But it's spelled with a hyphen. It's pronounced Punchman, but it's spelled PUNCH-MAN. Hence the confusion.
Well,
so the public at large thought that he considered himself a superhero, but it was just an unfortunate naming mishap.
Well, not only that, but he was known for his lemonade stand on the side of the road that he would exclusively sell fruit punch.
Yes, yet he still called it a lemonade stand.
I know, it was very bizarre. But he was the Punch Man, and everyone was like, I could go for some punch. We should call it Punchy.
He was a very bizarre man, but he is the protagonist. Well, he's one of two protagonists. There's also his beautiful platonic friend, Gemsworth. Jenny Gemsworth. I forgot about it because I forgot about everything of this book because it's been over a year since I read it. As was previously established.
You have not read the updated version, then, have you?
Perhaps would you like to remind me, and then I'll take it from there.
Well, I mean, the main update from the 2018 version came right at the end, so I don't want to get into that quite yet. We'll work our way to
Does
that.
it change Jenny Gemsworth from being the second protagonist?
No.
Then let's talk about Jenny Gemsworth.
Well, I thought it was very interesting that the author Jenny Copperton decided to name the second protagonist Jenny as well. It's very interesting. And funny that you noted that because I didn't even remember that until right now.
Well, she was a big fan of David D. Magic, so
Yeah. And he was known for naming his characters after himself.
well, at least the
one
main
especially.
one.
No, David. Yeah, there was Magical Dave and Magic Dave. The two characters, at least.
Right.
Probably other Daves.
I'm sure everybody listening to this has also listened to that episode, but in case they haven't, let's move on.
Yeah, we're getting sidetracked.
Speaking of that, just to bring it back to Magical Dave and Magic Dave, there's actually the two Jennies in this book.
Of course there is.
Yes, don't you remember?
I did not.
There's a
But carry on.
switcheroo in the middle of the
Oh, I
book.
love switcheroos.
Yes, there's Jenny with a J and Jenny with a G.
Yeah,
And
they're
in fact-
literally identical to each other, and I think it may have been a typo, but I like to treat them as two different characters.
It's a real Yaks in Miami situation.
It really is.
But I digress, as usual.
Well, because like all the characters on this peninsula or island, as they called it, because they didn't know it was a peninsula.
Well, because there was a boundary line
Yeah.
that they just never looked past.
it said beware, and they were wary.
Also, there was that's where they kept the legion of
Muskrats.
Yes, the muskrats, which hid inside the tour bushes, and you couldn't see past the tour bushes. But if you did see past the tour bushes, you would simply see the tour water, and so it looked like it was the other end of the island.
Islandic.
Yes, but unfortunately, of course, if you opened the door to the water, you would see the rest of the land.
So, as we mentioned before, all the characters on this island were believed to have superpowers, but did not actually have any powers. So Jenny Gemsworth, of course, was believed to have the power
to create everything that she touched would turn into a valuable gem.
Absolutely.
Which was a common
the words right out of my
misconception
mouth.
because what happened was she had leprosy. And and so
Go on. I want to hear more about this.
well, it was a very extreme case. It was very advanced and it was very, very contagious. So whenever she would touch somebody, their limbs would fall off. Again, this is fictional, so it may take a few liberties, but their limbs would fall off, and there was like a mild anesthetic that went through the body when it happened, which they also thought was a superpower, but it wasn't. Anyway, so the limb would fall off, and you wouldn't notice because of the mild anesthetic that went through your body. But it would crumble on the way down into like sort of a nugget, and then you would pick it up and be like, "Ooh, this looks valuable."
There is a fine line between superpowers and crippling diseases.
Yes, but it's often not explored well enough, like in this book. So anyway, that was Jenny Gemsworth.
Our second protagonist.
Yes, it was her superpower / super problem. But it didn't matter much.
No. So life on the island was going well. Everyone was quite happy to be away from the paparazzi, not knowing that the tour bushes were full of tourists.
Well, we should go back a little bit and explain why they got put on the island in the first place. And that is, of course, because so they were all originally from different parts of the world.
Of course.
But in a slightly alternate version of 2004, the governments of the United Nations all got together and decided that superheroes were a big problem because they needed something to direct the media towards. So they rounded up all the people that had supposedly been reported as having superpowers, like the power to sell punch at a lemonade stand or the power to give someone leprosy. Additionally, there were lots of other powers like being a little bit more tolerant to hot weather, being...
It's the man that was really good at opening bottles without a bottle opener.
Yes, smash, smash, smash.
That was his nickname. He just went as like Bottle Jim.
Yeah, but he was a slightly larger than abnormal man. Wait. Yes, he was slightly larger than what would be an abnormally larger man. He was slightly larger than that, but not by much. Anyway, and of course, after in 2004 was just after, I believe, the Incredible Hulk, or sorry, no, not the movie that was just named Hulk had come out.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's Dahi's favorite.
No,
He likes the Incredible Hulk, the one that's also bad. But anyway, so that movie had just come out, and people were a little bit afraid of it, and but they started nicknaming him Smash, Smash, Smash after Hulk. But all he ever did with his slightly larger than abnormally large stature was to open bottles for people because he just wanted to be liked.
He was just a bartender, and it just got way out of hand.
Yes, literally.
And of course, in the 2016 version of the book, it's just a whole bunch of Suicide Squad references. Instead of...
Yes, but everything else is the same.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Like I said, I read the 2015 version.
He is just simply called...
Smash Shot?
No, Academy Award is his name. Because it's equally undeserved. Anyway, yeah, so they rounded up all these different people, all... 6 of them, and because the author Copperton, she didn't want to have to write about too many of these people.
Well, this is the thing, right? There were like hundreds of people on this island, but because Jenny didn't want to write hundreds of characters, they're just all literally clones of those 6 characters. Just all strewn across this island.
One of my favorite characters that did not get nearly enough, not screen time, but page time, I guess, was John the Milkman. And he was literally just a milkman that got misrepresented and thrown on the plane. He really did not want to be there. He was the only one that did not want to be on that plane. He's like, I've got a job, I've got a family and kids. Don't put me on the plane. They're like, quiet, John. You've got to get on that plane.
So let's talk about the milkman's powers real quick. Again, Milkman, John the Milkman.
It was ironic. His last name was actually Milkman as well. It just seemed like he was destined for a job as a milkman.
Yes, but it's very different to Punchman because, Punchman, because, see, while that was a common misconception, John the Milkman, absolutely had no powers of any kind, but he wanted to have powers, so he just ran around calling himself Milkman and throwing cartons of milk at people that he deemed to be bad. Mostly his in-laws and a couple of the neighborhood squirrels, which actually is where we get to the human flying squirrel, because he, the human flying squirrel, who is a very short man, a little shorter than abnormally short.
But only slightly.
Only slightly. Was actually living among the squirrels because he had been kicked out of his home for being rude. So he was living among the squirrels, and he donned his flying squirrel suit, which was
just wings. We decided, or we didn't decide.
No, it was like a wing suit that was like looked like a flying squirrel. That's what it was.
Yes, I don't know what you decided, but Dahi and I read the book, so
Yeah.
I thought I did. I thought he had webbed appendages, and I was informed by you guys that he had wings.
I said
Well,
wing
what do I
suit
know?
several times.
I think that you guys are reading different versions of the book.
Probably.
I think that the book has updated its sense. I'm still only reading the 2005 original that I just kept apparently putting the dates of the time back on with the stickers that I forgot about.
Yes.
So mine doesn't change. So any inconsistencies here henceforth, that's the reason.
Yeah, no, it's like there must have been something in the media at the time about
I probably
webbed
just misread it.
people or something. I
Webbed
don't know.
people.
This is actually going to
What
make
was
this.
on the web? That might have been why I confused it.
Okay.
This is actually going to make this discussion a little different than normal because apparently we're all have very different recollections of the book, based on legitimate reasons for it. But
The overarching story is still the same.
yes, it is. What was I? Oh, yes. So the human flying squirrel, who may or may not have had webbed feet and or wings, but definitely could fly-ish, was living among the squirrels. This is not different from your copy, is it?
Nope, this is valid.
He was living among the squirrels for being kicked out of his home for being too rude. And as he was with the squirrels, they don't mention why. I think he was just an odd man. Anyway, that's precisely when John the Milkman started throwing his cartons of milk at the squirrels and hit the human flying squirrel in the face. And human flying squirrel had a vengeance against John the Milkman from that point forward, which is why he ultimately stowed upon the plane. But that comes up a little bit later.
What I found interesting was like the hero-villain dynamic was between John the Milkman and the human flying squirrel, neither of which were protagonists of this book.
No. It was quite a different dynamic than most books.
Yeah. It's just like this actual true hero-villain story going on in the background while we follow our protagonists on the island.
Punchy Punchman and Jenny Gemstone. Gemsworth.
With a G at first.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, the Gemsworth was always with a G.
Yes.
Well, you're talking about Jenny Gemsworth is the GG. Like
Yeah.
Jenny Gemsworth, but then her identical twin sister / clone.
/ typo. We haven't figured out, but
No. She was, we know what happened there. She was a clone of Jenny, but
That's why
she was
it wasn't a typo. It was okay. I get it.
But
now.
she was
about the
the
clones.
original clone of Jenny and changed her name to a J and called herself her sister. All the other Jenny clones didn't, but that Jenny did.
gotcha. Okay. That all makes much more sense.
So there's 6 people on the island with all the different clones version, and there's also So, okay, but let's start. So you've got Punchy Punchman.
Punchy Punchman, Jenny Gemsworth, Human Flying Squirrel, Bottle Jim, also known as Smash Smash Smash, and John the Milkman. And of course, our sixth and
We know the sixth one is Jenny Gemsworth, the
other
sister
Jenny?
queen. Yes, yes, she is also one of the.
I didn't count
main
her as
six
one of the
queens.
sixes.
Oh, she is.
I mean,
The other-
the author Jenny
the other
kind of got
Jen-
lazy. Let's be real.
And the
enough.
other clone Jennies don't count, but these are the main Jennies, of which there are two. But then there is, sorry, did you count Human Flying Squirrel in that six? Because Human Flying Squirrel is not part of the six. Human Flying Squirrel stowed upon as the secret seventh person, but the sixth person that we neglected to mention is somebody that Dahi is going to mention right now.
Oh yeah, this is Frank Framer's son. He's the
Son of Frank Framer.
Yes.
Frank Framer's son. Yes, Frank Framer's son. What was his superhero name? Thank you for introducing him as the son of Frank Framer. But would you mind telling us his superhero name now?
His superhero name was the Human Frame.
Ah, that makes sense because he's of Frank Framer's kin,
Yeah.
which are framers, and his son went through a horrible accident on one particular framing job.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually, coincidentally enough, framing the lemonade stand sign for Punchy Punchman.
This is true. And he just ended up within the framing device. Like he got sucked up into it and part of his body became the frame. Basically he tore his arm off. It was very gruesome.
Well, not only that, but so yeah, he is missing one arm, which has become part of the frame. But then the part of the frame that was supposed to be where his arm is now his arm.
Yeah.
So
This
he's
is
just got like a 2x4 for an arm.
basically.
He smacks people.
But it has a 90
doesn't
degree.
punch them.
It has a 90 degree bend in it,
Oh yeah,
which
it's
is
great
important.
for like when he tries to lift himself up onto higher things.
You see, exactly, because there's a fine line between superpowers and debilitating
workplace accidents.
injuries. Yes.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Do you remember that being that we're Canadian? Do you remember that commercial? Dahi wouldn't, but do you remember that commercial that played on like YTV about like a terrible CG robot who like went running through like a super dangerous like space factory, and then his arm gets like ripped off, and he puts it back on, and he's like, "My name is Human Child," or something to that effect. I can put my arm back on. You can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man,
That has nothing to do with this, but it just reminded me
that
of
was nostalgia and a half right there.
Yes.
Sorry, Dahi. You're just gonna have to live vicariously through our nostalgia.
Canadians are weird.
Yeah.
So the sixth person, the Human Frame, whose name we never find out. He just simply is Frank Framer's son. Now, his name isn't Frank Framerson. He is Frank Framer's son.
Yes.
The Human Frame. He had a name originally, but it no longer was important after he became a human frame.
I mean, his father disowned him at that point.
Well, actually, his father sold him by accident.
Well, it was just part of one of the deals when he was designing a house, and he said, "Oh yeah, well, it'll cost you this much for all the 2x4s and all the 2x6s, and I'll throw my son in." And before he could say anything about like, "Oh, that was an accident," it was too late. His son was part of the deal.
Yeah, so it was definitely intentional, but he passed
Played
it
it
off
off,
as an
yeah.
accident when he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, son. I thought that I got my money."
Well, this was around the time that they were rounding up all the superheroes, and his father was not a very nice man, and thought, if I can get my son on that plane and shipped off to the island, I'll be well better off.
Right, which is exactly why he sold him to the family of the Human Flying Squirrel, which was their names were the Mendelssohns. And I remember that because they made a note of whenever they introduced themselves, they specifically said, "Hello, we're the Mendelssohns." They wrote it out in the book. They had a pronunciation guide. The Mendelssohns. So anyway, the Mendelssohns were very angry Irish, a very angry Irish family. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you can relate.
Oh, always. I'm always angry.
You're certainly angry when David D. Magic was here. But anyway, no, not all Irish families are angry. I'm
I
just
didn't
saying.
say anything about that. I'm just saying.
saying you could-
They were Irish too? Oh, sorry, I
I'm
didn't
just saying
notice.
you could relate to them being Irish.
No, I couldn't.
Oh, okay.
It was just the anger.
Anyway,
Mendelssohn's.
which is interesting because Mendelssohn isn't a traditionally Irish name, but so anyway, so the Mendelssohns had a son, Don, a traditionally Irish name.
Oh yeah.
So Don Mendelssohn was kicked out for being very rude and he was rude because he kept saying, "Hey, that frame you have is a person," and they were like, "It's very rude to give inanimate objects sentient feelings and possessive legality. So get out." And away he went. But he took the frame with him.
But this is the origin of the human flying squirrel, is it not? Who was kicked out of his family for being too rude.
Yes, my point is that everything connects.
Oh, I didn't piece that together.
Haha, yes. So anyway, the human flying squirrel then of course ran off, and then he got hit by milkmen with the milk, and then the frame which we just called the human frame, of course, because he no longer had a name. So the Frank Framer's son, the human frame. Went chasing after the human squirrel. Sorry,
Flying squirrel.
flying squirrel.
Can't lose that flying adjective.
He
That
ran
is literally
after-
part of his identity.
Yes, ran after a human flying squirrel
Adverb, I suppose, but
to apologize, and to say that you weren't rude. But he got there just in time to see him get round up with milkman, and so he stowed upon the
aeroplane.
Well, he meant to stow upon the aeroplane, but instead what he did was he actually got human flying squirrel off of the plane and took his place. And then human flying squirrel stowed back on, not to save the human frame, but again to get vengeance upon John the Milkman.
For the milk chuckery.
Yes, for the milk chuckery.
That's how they described it in the book. I'm not making this up.
Yes. So that, I believe, is that, and they're all on the plane and they get dropped off on the island, and the idea was that they were going to televise this. It was going to be a death match to see. This actually inspired the Hunger Games, unless the Hunger Games came out before this book.
I think it did. If this came... No, 2005. I don't know.
Whichever one came out
matter.
first
They're
inspired
similar
the other
concepts,
one.
Yeah.
And that is a fact. Look it up. So, anyway, so they're on the island.
And they didn't really battle each other as much as was initially anticipated, and they started to try and put together a civilization with Jenny and Punchy leading the front on. They were like, "Oh, we just need to build some houses. What about you, human frame? Can you help us?" And he was a little shy at first and didn't really want to help build these houses, but Jenny said, "You know, if you don't, I'm going to make your arm fall off." And I mean your good arm, because the other one's already a couple 2x4s.
Yes, and so he was like, "Oh, but what can we do? Because they needed the frame of his hand to build the houses, but they only had one, so they couldn't do more than that."
But they were all cloned, right?
Well, not yet. This is what leads to the cloning process,
that's
which is
right,
where I
that's
was
right.
going. So what he does is, unbeknownst to everyone else, is that the human frame also has another nickname, the human brain. And the human...
Yes.
Yes.
Go on.
So as the human brain, he was the smartest. He was the smartest of all.
The less than super folk.
Well, not only that, but he was also the smartest of all wooden frames everywhere.
Absolutely. That's an understatement.
And so using his power of mindfulness, he said, "Ooh, I'll build a cloning device and clone myself, and then we can cut the arms off of all of the me's and build the houses." So he quickly went off and did that.
But this is when all the other less than super folk on the island said, well, wait a minute, like, why are you the only one to get some clones? We want some clones too. Like,
that is what they said amongst themselves, and thought they were saying it to him, but he had already run off, so they were just saying it to themselves. So what they then devised a plan was to jump into the cloning machine and clone themselves as well, so that they could repopulate the island with each other many times.
just with the clones mostly, but also...
Yes. And each clone comes out with its own individual personality. So, of course, some of them are
sassy.
Yes. But also, or not just personality, but also sexual preference. So some of them don't procreate. Some of them procreate more than others. Some of them are completely asexual. It doesn't matter. They're like the orientation of them didn't matter. The point is that they weren't going to get completely overrun because they weren't all into banging.
No, but they were getting overrun surely by the number of clones they were
Or at least they weren't all into biological procreating.
Mm-hmm.
So, regardless, the point is that while the human frame, also known as the human brain, was over there building his device, they all jumped in before the human frame could clone himself, and they all jumped in at the same time because the human frame had made it a very large cloning tube.
I like that they added in the fact that they didn't have any materials to build houses, but they had so many materials on hand to build this cloning device.
Well, you don't build a cloning machine out of wood, Steve,
no, I know.
but you do build a house out of wood.
Yeah.
And you would think, oh, well, why didn't they just use all the plants and trees and shrubbery and stuff like that? But, of course, those were all tourist devices used to view the island, as was previously
and
stated.
as soon as they tried to get towards them, then they sent out the muskrats to attack them.
Exactly.
So they were a little terrified of the tourist bushes.
That's right.
Which perfectly explains why they couldn't use the wood around there and they had to clone the human frame, also known as the human brain.
That makes the most sense, as far as I can tell.
Well, I didn't write it. Jenny Copperton did.
Good on you, Jenny. We like it.
So anyway... hundreds of these, everybody except for the human frame, just start spilling out of this tube, and they break the tube before human frame can even clone himself. So
it leaves the island with these with hundreds of these clones
and no houses.
No shelter.
Yeah.
So
And only one human frame.
So that's when war breaks out, which was what they wanted, the governments, but not like this. Not like this. So.
But it makes for great TV.
Well,
and that's what it was really all about for
It
them.
would have made for great TV if the cameras worked. But they used the cameras to make the cloning machine.
Right. Well, how else are you going to get a perfect copy of someone other than take a picture and or video of them?
Exactly.
They didn't question why there was all these cameras on the island, but they thought, hey, look at all this
They were
technology
like, these
that
are
grows
the only
here.
resources that we can actually claim for ourselves.
I hope it doesn't
Exactly.
take too long for another camera to grow if we harvest this one.
And the lack of cameras is, of course, why they couldn't televise this entire fight, which is what the governments wanted. And then that's why they didn't want it to happen like this. And, of course, there were riots everywhere, and the TV show didn't happen, and all the sponsors pulled out. And speaking of that, today's podcast is sponsored by leprosy. Don't touch it.
Today's podcast is also brought to you by Frank Framer's Frames. It'll cost us an arm, but not a leg.
It's also brought to you by Punchy Punchman's Lemonade Stand. We don't actually sell punch, but our lemonade is punchin'.
It's also brought to you by the tourist bush. Yep.
Also brought to you by muskrats. They're just like regular rats, but oddly cuter.
It's also brought to you by Milk Chuckers. Chuck that milk real far, real fast.
And finally, it is brought to you by the website
Smashsmash.com.
.org/Framings. There's 17 N's in there. /TUBC podcast. And if you go to that website and enter in promo code TUBC podcast, they will send you a free human milk. Man,
Mm-hmm.
One of the clones.
A
from the
free
book.
human milkman
Yeah.
who will provide milk for the next 12 months.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So back to the.
So
I was going to say farm, but there's no farm in this one.
No,
there's no farm.
They,
didn't
they
wanna-
couldn't.
No,
They
it's
couldn't
not in
use.
this book.
They couldn't make. the
I
farm.
specifically chose this book because it had no farms.
Yes.
Anyways, so unbeknownst to all the people living on the island, who should be the network executive that was running this television show but Frank the Framer himself?
Yeah, he got out of the framing business when he lost his only son in a sale that he sold him away in.
Yep. So he was very upset when the fact that all the cameras were gone and he suddenly was not going to make any money off his son in this reality show either.
Yeah, he was pissed off because none of the people on the island were in frame.
Yes, which is the whole problem that we just explained.
So this is when he decides to storm the island with his slightly even less than super folk that he rounded up from the mainland.
Yeah,
There wasn't many of them, but there was a few.
there was 9 we had, and I remember their names.
Well, there was Hugh Manatee, and he was just like the human manatee.
Yes, there was also Jack Burns.
Jack Burns, yeah.
He was a man that had been.
Well, he just had a lighter.
Yes. Yes, he did. And then there was also Chrissy. There's also Chrissy. She was the accountant. Chrissy the accountant. She made sure everybody did things by the numbers.
Mm-hmm. That was her superhero name as well, the accountant.
Christy the accountant.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there was also Neil Everyman. He
just
He was
always
very religious, wasn't he?
Yes,
And he was trying to
exactly.
get everyone to pray to him all the time, and just kept saying "Kneel, every man." But they were like, "Yeah, that's your name. What are you trying to get across here?"
yes.
Actually, it was pronounced Everyman, though, so they were wondering why he was pronouncing his own name wrong. That was funnier than you gave it credit for. Oh, for fuck's sake!
I don't think it was supposed to be funny. It was just in the book.
I know, and I thought it was funny in the book.
And the rest. So they all.
That was the next hero. His name was the rest.
But he was really lazy, and he just like laid down all the time.
Yes, because he figured a rested man is a useful man. So he was just continually taking a rest. They would be like, "Open your eyes," and he'd be like, "I'm just resting them."
Well,
And then there were 4 more, which they were all they were the 4 horse riders of the day. Because what happened was Frank the Framer went to a stable that had new riders every day. So these were the 4 horse riders of that day.
Yes.
And but they couldn't take the horses on the plane, so they were just 4 people. And they didn't have any names because they weren't important. So moving on.
they were on a plane. I thought they were on a boat for some reason.
Yes.
A boat with wings.
Yes, they were on a seaplane.
Yeah.
So it started
Also
off
known as an airboat.
It started off as a boat in the water, and then when they took off into the air, it became a plane,
Gotcha.
like an actual seaplane.
Yes.
Because a seaplane can be classified as both a boat and a plane.
Well, see, that was where I was confused because one of the horses that the horseman came from was Sea Biscuit, but you can't also classify it as a biscuit, a boat.
No, because that's a different thing.
I know, but I just thought it was interesting. They tried to tie it in. It didn't really apply at all, but who am I to judge?
That's what we do here on this review podcast: is we judge the books.
That's true. And review them.
That's who you are to judge. Yes, a review is a judgment.
Fair enough. All right.
Because a review can also be classified as a judgment. Just like a seaplane can also be classified as a boat, just like this book review can also be classified as continuing. So let's do it. Anyway, so they land in the water next to the island, to the peninsula.
In the airboat / seaplane.
Just a seaplane, but yes.
They could have just taken a bus. But
Yeah.
whatever.
It's a peninsula.
Or they could have taken a tourist bush,
This is true.
but they didn't.
But they didn't.
Well, actually, that's probably because Chrissy the accountant has an unnatural fear of muskrats. I don't know why they wrote that in, but they did.
Well, because it connects in the way that it just did.
Was it a fear or an allergy?
Yes.
Oh, that's a good point.
It was both. She was afraid of
Because
her
she
allergies.
was-
I think she didn't even know if she had an allergy, and that was the real fear.
Oh.
Like, if you don't know you're allergic to bees and you get stung by a bee, that's a big deal.
Well, she wasn't sure because she'd never run the numbers on it. It's true. So, anyway, so they arrive on the island, and their plan is to put the cameras back up so that they can get the show on the road. But of course,
The Road was the television network that Frank owned, wasn't it?
it definitely was. They wanted to get the show back on the road television network that Frank the Framer owned. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, just trying to keep everybody honest.
And so they went around and started erecting cameras. Go ahead, Steve.
So, yeah, they're working away, putting up these cameras, and they're like, oh, there's Jenny Gemsworth. We dropped her off on the island. And there's Jenny Gemsworth. There's another Jenny. How many Jennies are on this island? Because obviously with the cameras gone, they didn't realize that all this cloning had taken place. And so one of the Jennies, in quite an irate fashion, because they all have different personalities, just came right over and walked up to Neil Everyman, and just tapped him slightly on the shoulder, and he just crumpled up into a leprositic pile of leprosy. That's a word. That's what Jenny used. So
Yes.
But then, of course, the rest of them decide to fight against all of these.
yeah, this is what
Jennies.
started the real war.
Yeah.
So you had all the clones. Some of the clones were fighting some of the other clones, and then some of those clones were fighting against the original people who were fighting against the new group who were fighting against yet more clones. And it was a big.
Well, what happened at the start that to cause the infighting between the clones was that all of the Jennies tried to join together in a wall around them, but they ended up touching each other. And at that point, it was pure Jenny-side.
And once all the Jennies were gone, the other clones started infighting as well because they all thought that they were the original, and no one could decide who was the clone and who wasn't. So all this was happening. It became very hostile. And then, of course, with the mass Jenny-side that had happened, tensions were higher than ever. And there was no proof of any of this because they didn't get the cameras up before the fighting started. And so what happened is that the United Nations decided that this was just a huge loss. So they were just going to bomb the whole island and just
Peninsula.
the whole peninsula, and just pretend it never happened. So that's what they did. They sent in nuclear weapons, but they were specialized nuclear weapons designed by the human brain. Because he moonlit as a child scientist before this whole thing. They didn't mention it until this point.
Yeah.
But anyway,
It seemed ironic that his own weapons are going to be used against him in the end.
yes. But the thing is that they take a little while, so you can see them coming in the air. So the human brain / human frame saw that, and of course, so did human flying squirrel, who had been hiding in the tourist bushes, in amongst the tourist bushes this whole time, just watching things for the right moment. And he saw those, and he said, "Well, I'm getting the human frame out of here." So he jumped in and grabbed the human frame and flew off, because as it turns out, human flying squirrel had real superpowers all along. and flew himself in the human frame out of
over the bushes, the tourist bushes, over the
tourist bushes, over the tourist water.
Yep, and into one of the 4 valleys.
Yes,
where
absolutely.
they decided to take shelter.
Yes, so that it was Valley number 3, Valencior. And so off they went, and then of course the bombs came and just blew the entire peninsula off the face of the map.
Well, the first bomb hit, and it blew the peninsula off of the rest of the country, so it became an island for a brief second. For a brief second, they told the truth.
Until the second bomb came and then destroyed the island as well.
This is true.
And so they were all gone, but there were 17 more nukes on the way.
Well, Humanity, the guy that came in with Frank the Framer,
who is now very dead.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah,
Never
he
mind.
was, and
But
people
before he
cried
died,
out.
I was gonna say, before he died out, he believed he had a special power that he could never walk on land, so he was in the ocean, just hanging out while trying to, like, waving at his friends, being, "Hello, don't forget about me here. Like, I swam alongside your seaplane the whole way here," and then he got blown up.
yes. And it was just an interesting little note to throw in there. It doesn't solve the problem in any way, because it didn't.
So
and
who do we
I'm
have
sorry
left at
for
this
that,
point
Steve.
now?
Well, all that's left is the human frame and Frank the flying.
So they-
not Frank the flying squirrel.
It was bizarre
Frank the human frame and human flying squirrel, who were in one of the 4 valleys, and they had 17 nukes now headed for these valleys, and so they came up with a very quick plan to divert 1/3 of each of the remaining nukes into the remaining 3 valleys.
Now, I want to say that I think it was a very brave decision to kill off the 2 protagonists before
I was just
the
about
climax
to comment
of the book.
on that. Yeah.
Now, obviously, when we introduced them, we didn't want to spoil it too much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was a very brave decision.
Well, they pulled a real Star Wars there, in that you think that Luke is the real protagonist of Star Wars, but later on you find out that it was actually Anakin / Darth Vader the whole time, and anybody who thinks differently is wrong.
I have not enough information to disagree.
Yes.
And so even the backstory battle between the hero and the villain with John the Milkman and the human flying squirrel.
That was all gone, too.
Yeah, well, the human flying squirrel was still alive, still
And he
villainous
won.
as ever. But he also had this separate agenda where he took the human frame, and it seemed like he was up to good. But then it turned out he had nefarious purposes up his sleeve. Well, his, like, squirrel sleeves.
Yes. Also, I don't know that he was ever really evil. He was just a little rude.
Oh, that's true.
But he was also misunderstood. And that
As
caused
most
him...
Mendelssohns were. Sorry, Mendelssohns.
Mendelssohn's. Yes. So anyway, he did have something up his sleeve. He had a heat source, a very powerful heat source that he had created earlier before the book started. And this heat source would make all the nukes track it to the 3 other remaining valleys, and then he did that, and it totally worked, and that was the end of the book.
Yeah, it was just a curling iron, wasn't it?
3 curling irons.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but he said that it was very... He made this big grandiose gesture about it. But it was just 3 curling irons, but they were slightly hotter than an abnormally hot curling iron.
They were, indeed.
Well, it was interesting because just before he threw the curling irons, there was that odd chapter where time didn't exist, where it just everything froze midair, and it was just a brief chapter. Actually, Dahi, I think you have it in front of you, don't you? You can just.
Oh yeah,
it's only like a paragraph and a half or so. Well, you can't have a half
it's
paragraph.
literally a paragraph and a half of the same letter over and over again because time stopped. So that's the only that. So it's just
See, I thought, okay, that makes sense. I thought it was them screaming as the bombs were dropping.
No. It was that time pausing thing.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, that makes a lot more sense.
And so, of course, the book ends with the conclusion, which is that the plan worked. The nukes ended up in the valleys, and everybody was happy. And it was a very anticlimactic ending, but it was a little rushed in the end. But that's just the way that Copperton wrote it. But before we end this podcast, I would like to mention that we did not yet read the back of the book, and Caitlin actually just walked in. So we'll let her read the back of the book. Caitlin?
Enter a world of betrayal, gunfire, and cheeseburgers as we focus on love and acceptance. Join me on this journey together. And
I believe that sums up this book quite...
Very much does.
Yeah, no, that's like, why did we read the book? We could have just read the back.
We didn't even have to review it. We could have literally just led with that, and everyone listening would have gotten the same out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Thank you all for listening to the Totally Unreal Book Club podcast, our weekly review podcast in association with the Voices of Anarchy, of which everyone here is also a member. You can check us out at www.voicesofanarchy.com or on Twitter at voicesanarchy. You can find the podcast on podcast services around the globe, and you can support the podcast on patreon.com/tubcpodcast. That's TUBC podcast. On Twitter and Instagram at TUBC podcast, and you can literally just find us everywhere else at TUBC podcast. Please also remember, if you like the TUBC podcast, to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating and a written review. It really helps out the show, and we would appreciate it. I'd like to thank the panel once again this week, and you can follow each of us on our personal Twitters at
handfofficial,
Steve Marriott,
caitlionroar,
and willjwood. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Heat stroke is almost as bad as a real stroke.